88, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. And we'll start with a roll call. Down there on the end, fellow in the black shirt.
Brian Nash.
Jeannie Nyer.
Tony Stein.
Jerry Fleming.
Dave Bench.
Evan Fry.
Okay, very good. We're going to see whether there are any public comments that need to be made. Would you? Okay, we have somebody here who would like to address the commission before we start into regular business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name's Gene Feit. I live at 5100 Rollingwood Drive, which is the last residence before you get out onto Bee Cave. I'm in what I think is referred to as the triangle. My house is zoned commercial, so it is in the commercial district that you all are considering tonight. I've always known it been commercial. We've been in the property 30 years, and it's not a surprise. But the extensive review of the code sent me off to do something I rarely do, which is read through a document like the planning document the draft document that you all put together, to see how it might affect me. And I got almost to the 1900th line, and it said a non-conforming structure that is a residence. And I said, that's me. And it said that I cannot, if the building is torn down, I can build a similar non-conforming structure, but I can't improve it substantially. I can't change it. And that struck me as that was a surprise, because my assumption had always been that the zoning for that property, although was in a commercial district, was more appropriate to residential than that. Like people elsewhere in Rollingwood, I suspect that if and when I sell the property, it will be torn down and something bigger will be built there. It's a big lot. It's 15,000 square feet. You could put a big house there and a pool and still have room in your backyard. But it sounds like it's either take it as it is or it's commercial, and that was a shock to me. So I'm bringing my concern before you. I don't know what action you can take tonight, but I would hope that you would look into this. I don't know whether you discussed the residential properties in the commercial district when the draft was drawn. I have no idea, and it's probably, you know better than I do. But I would like to have the option to sell the property either as a residential, where someone who wanted to develop it, or as commercial. And I'm currently paying what I think is property taxes for a residential property. And my wife and I are both octogenarians, so we think about taking care of ourselves in our old age, and that's part of our estate planning, was to sell the property as a residence. So I don't know what to tell you to do. You're the experts on that, but you could write some paragraph at line 1891 that was more resident friendly, and then it just being non-conforming and can't be changed. Or you could take it out of the commercial district. I mean, I think there are options that you might want to consider, but all I can do tonight is raise my concern as a property owner in the city of Rollingwood. So thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have them.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
If it's related to the item, yeah.
Well, it is. I'm wondering.
I'm hard of hearing.
Okay, so am I.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'm curious, real quick, what the address was
We
again?
know that. We know the
What-
problem.
What was your address again, sir?
What's that?
What was your address again?
5100 Rollingwood Drive,
Yeah.
and it's in the triangle.
Yeah. So, would you be open to having the zoning changed for your property to
Yeah,
to
I'd be
residential?
open to that. I mean,
Yeah.
I know it's, I think it's probably worth more as a residential property than a commercial property, but I don't know. I haven't
Wonder
talked to any
why it
commercial.
was zoned that way to begin with.
What's that?
Wonder why it was zoned that way to begin with.
I bought the property from a guy by, I've forgotten his first name. His last name was Miller.
Okay.
And he developed, I was told he had developed much of the triangle.
Okay.
And that he, that dwelling that I was in was eventually going to become one of the commercial properties.
Mm-hmm.
And then as his empire started to fall apart, he wound up living there.
Okay.
And he sold it to me as a residence.
Okay. Hmm.
That's my understanding.
Oh, right.
30 years ago, it's a little
that's cool.
hazy.
This is interesting. We'll look into it, okay? Anybody have any questions for Gene here?
So, and I'm happy to address this in more detail during item 3, which is the rezoning.
Okay.
Which would be an appropriate agenda item that we can have a deeper discussion, since that is property that is on that list.
All right, Fiona. Oh, that is on our list, huh? It's one of these, is it?
I did not hear what you.
Sure. So what I said is I'm happy to. Yes.
Is,
Get there. So I'm happy to address it during item 3 on the agenda.
Yeah,
because we have
okay.
zoning.
All right, I saw that.
And because it's one of the properties that's currently zoned commercial, and item 3 is looking to rezone everything, the C1 and C2 to C.
Yes, that's right.
And so we can talk more specifically about your property at
Right.
that time, because we've got an agenda item for it.
Okay, thank you.
that is in this? Oh, there it is. Yeah, right there at the top.
Yeah, I'm the first one
Good.
on the list.
I see that.
I'm number one every.
Yeah, you're special, yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I don't. Sometimes that's not a good thing.
Very good.
Okay, so I'll stick around for that discussion,
Sure, yeah.
and I'm still available for any questions.
The item in front of it may take another minute or two.
Thank you very much. Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
thank you. Very good, thank you. Appreciate your coming. Any other, we're good?
Well, we can talk about it.
Okay, very good, okay. All right, we're going to move on to regular agenda item number 2, the discussion of possible action regarding an amendment to the city's Code of Ordinances, Part 1, Chapter 24, Signs and Advertising, and Part 2, Chapters 101, Buildings and Construction, 103, Environmental Protection and Control, 107, Zoning related to aligning the city's codes with the recommendations of the city's comprehensive plan for the commercial corridor and other matters in connection therewith. I've been asked by Mr. Tom Farrell here if he could address some of this before we got started in any discussion. I know he brought some information here that I think we'll all find interesting, so I'm going to give it to Tom here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Farrell, 3223 Park Hills Drive. Thank y'all for being on our Planning and Zoning Commission. I think part of this, and I was not here at the last meeting, but part of the issues that came up was impervious cover and the lack of incentives for some of our buildings to redevelop, given that they currently exceed 50% impervious cover, and how we would handle that and how we looked at that. Part of this was going to be addressed as, if you take a look at our whole deal, the parking issue that we have. Most of these buildings that we have that exceed 50%, they're all incidentally are grandfathered, so they're going to be there. And thank God we live in a state where private property rights are valued. So they're going to be able to stay there, do whatever they want. Nothing that that we have changes come up is going to affect their property negatively. That just gives them some other options. All we were trying to do is provide some incentives and some ways for them to go forward. When you look at the parking issues that we have, that we've made some recommendations on, which one may just do away with the parking requirement, that would enable that, the fact that property owners can go to a third-party site and get their parking, as well as the fact that, and we've looked at this very carefully, the city of Rollingwood owns a substantial amount of property off of Edge Grove, which is behind a number of these properties that exceed 50%. And Rollingwood, we intended, or we possibly use that as a lease for parking for a lot of these businesses on that. So the end result was that while you may be at 60% impervious cover today, if you took out the parking issues that we had to deal with, you could actually have a larger building and still stay within the 50% impervious cover rules on that. So this is something that we considered and we spent a great deal of time on, and is that my time? So I'll be glad to answer any questions on that.
Well, Tom, thanks. The commissioner who had the most questions about the impervious cover isn't with us yet. I think I understood he's on his way. Maybe we'll see what happens if we get through this item.
I would say that if there's nothing magic. If there's some suggestions about, I think we're all in agreement that we'd like to see some more uses of BK's Road that's more beneficial to our city from a sales tax standpoint. And if you guys have some suggestions, I would think they'd be valued, and we'd certainly want to add them in. We want to add as many incentives as we can while protecting our waterways and protecting the drainage issues that we have to do on there. So
Yeah.
anything that you need to add, I would suggest that you might want to add that. Thank y'all so much for y'all's time.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
I think Mike's question on the impervious cover issue was more, Tom, related to, or I think part of it at least was related to if there'd been some discussion with business owners or commercial developers, because it sounded like an additional restriction. And, you know, with TCEQ kind of having its own layer of, you know, it's indirectly restricting how much, you know,
Right.
impervious cover. And then we also have like some drainage sort of mechanisms in place that kind of cover what commercial businesses can do. And so because of those two things, just adding like an additional impervious cover layer to all of that starts sounding a little bit too complicated and create a disincentive to further commercial development.
Don't want to do that. And
Yeah.
I will tell you today, the way I read this is it's going to be a much easier process to go through as a building owner, as a property owner, than what you're facing in our current code. Our current code gives you basically 50%, and you have a parking requirement of one parking space for every 250 square feet of office space and one parking space for every 200 feet of retail space. So when you add that in its entirety on that, that's where most of our impervious cover, frankly, is in the parking lots on this. And so we tried to address it to give some options on that. You know, we could write we could write ordinances on basically on individual property owners, but that takes away the incentive of the entrepreneurship of what we hope can come in and show us some different ways that might come in and make this a reality to where we have some additional tax revenue, additional uses for our city that I think would be beneficial in the long run on that, and what our citizens have expressed as we went through this. To address your first point, we had two people on our comprehensive plan. One, we had a representative from the Westlake Chamber of Commerce. I'll get to it in a minute. And the second is we did have one of the larger property owners that was on there. We did contact
Palisades or?
Palisades.
Yeah.
Wally was on there. And Wally incidentally has been involved in Rollingwood for, I'm trying to think, dates back to the Emerald Airlines, if any of y'all remember that. Some of us may.
Some of us.
So, and so that is and we did contact a number of other commercial property owners, including the hospital site, which we did have them at our meetings. We did have the Rolling Wood Town Square people, which is the largest property owner in Rolling Wood that we had on that. So we tried to reach out to make sure that we did this, and we had some of the smaller property owners also that to get their input as we went through this.
Did those entities weigh in, or did they just? I mean, it's totally understandable if like we reached out and they just never participated.
No, we actually had a number of them have contributed to some of the issues we had. When we got down to the like the parking issues was something that we did have some issues with that. A lot of the issues that we had is, how is this going to negatively affect me as I go forward? Am I going to have to see are you mandating a change? And the answer was no on that. So we made sure that there is a grandfather clause in this comprehensive plan that does give these property owners the right to continue their current uses without interruption on that.
Okay.
So a lot of them had different type of issues, and as well, you know, each property owner is going to have their own, just like we'd each have our own individual guidelines that we went or issues that we may want to address individually on that. So we tried to make this as broad, and this is a list of incentives, and if it's not sufficient, we'll know. But we also have, as you alluded to, Brian, we've got to protect our waterways, because if we don't, TCQ is going to step in, and EPA will step in. So we've got to do what we have to do on that to keep us safe. And I think we all would rather we address it rather than having an outside entity address all those issues on that. So I think this is kind of one of those deals that clearly I think that we're giving a lot more incentives to property owners to change, to do a usage that the citizens indicated that they wanted. Is it perfect? May not be. And if it's not, we're going to have to come back and try to fix whatever issues that we have as we go forward on that. So
Yeah, I think that you can't let perfect get in the way of progress, right? And so,
yeah.
It could be the first step in something that
it's
gets amended over time.
Yeah, this is not realistically, none of us expect, especially right now, that we're going to see in the next year or two this magic of 26 doors and all our retail open up, and each of us has a favorite restaurant. We're not going to see Hopdoddy's come in on there, although we had the perfect place for them, and that's okay. We'll see if we can help them get there sometime or another. But we all have different places that we particularly like, and so we're gonna see how this works out. And keep in mind, part of the reason of the comprehensive plan is it does give us as a city more, and this is something I don't know that it's been addressed. It does give us as a city more stroke with TxDOT as to what happens on Bee Caves Road. Now, I'll remind everybody that in one of the TxDOT plans, they have reverse lanes proposed for Bee Caves Road. And what that means is the alternate lanes, in the morning, all 4 lanes is going to come in. In the afternoon, all 4 lanes is going to go out. Now, that's a terrible thing for our businesses, as we all know. So, and that affects each of our pocketbooks. So we have, by allowing and encouraging this, it gives us more stroke to have more businesses that would be dealing with negative impacts of that on Bee Caves Road. It's a little underlying deal there, but I think it's extremely important that be something to consider on that. So,
You have something?
Very good.
I have kind of a follow-up question about the engagement with business owners.
sure.
I think, everybody's initial reaction, instinct is probably fear, or you're going to do
yeah.
something that's going to damage my value or what I can do with it or whatever. Was there much engagement with them sort of in the other direction of, no, the opposite is happening. We're trying to create incentives.
We had a special survey just for commercial.
Okay.
Yeah.
businesses.
Yeah, I'm
We-
curious if you had
We did.
that where, you know, what can we do to help you, you know?
Yeah, we had, not only reached out with the survey, to not only the owners, but the, tenants as well. But we actually, just went over and visited with a bunch of them, because as we all know, you don't get, a lot of times you don't get the type of, response that you may want. And sometimes the owners gave us different responses than, say, the businesses
Right.
in the shopping center on that. But we tried to take that into account. Yes, we reached out, because this was a major deal from the standpoint of, in fact, we reached out to, one property owner that's one vacant lot that we have on Bee Caves Road, and had him at one of our meetings. So this is something that, and I will tell you, Wally Grainer was a very good advocate for the commercial property owners, and a lot of the property owners actually contacted Wally directly on that, to get their input into him, make sure that they got in there. So we've got a bunch of different sometimes conflicting goals. Was as if you were a property owner, you're going to want to maximize the use of your property, and then we have residential properties abutting you who really don't want you to maximize by going up 10 stories or 8 stories, whatever it is. So we had some conflicts that we had to deal with, and we tried to deal with them the best we could on that. And you're right, perfect is, you know, a goal, but not necessarily what you have to do. But that's where we've reached consensus on this. We did make sure that we had as much input as we could get from everybody. It doesn't mean that we followed it to the letter, but they had a right to speak, and did. So.
The thing that I was, from an elevator pitch standpoint, when we were talking about incentives, what's the easy way to describe it? Like, you started to say, it used to be that, or under our current code, it's like a 50%,
That's correct.
impervious cover restriction plus parking requirements that end up being restrictive. So we're hoping to take that out and then replace it with that's better. Like, what's the
The
bullet
parking,
point version, so that because I agree with you that that's exactly what it sounds like we're at, but I was getting questions on it, and I was like trying to sort of
There's a
describe
pretty good piece in the comprehensive plan that talks about what it was and what it's gonna be.
yeah. Brian, I think the easy answer is
Yeah.
this. You have, as a building owner, right now, you have a large front setback. So we're doing away, we're reducing that front setback. Because we want you to build, if you look at.
closer to the road.
Closer to the road
Yeah.
on this. We're allowing a lot more lenient parking, and maybe even no parking. There is one recommendation that's going in there that says, look, we're going to rely on you as a business owner to have the good sense to put your parking in there. And keep in mind, we are competitive, whether we like it or not, with some of our neighboring cities. City of Austin, for example, as you know, is doing a lot of this. And so we have to, if we want these property owners to do something different, we have to be not only competitive, but we have to show them that economically it makes sense to do that. So the parking issue is a major consideration on that. We're allowing for some benefits if you do certain things, that you can actually get greater than 50% impervious cover. So we're allowing that if you do, there are some incentives added on that if you do some water collection type of systems, same effect to us when we have drainage down below, which we have to deal with, but it does allow you as a property owner to expand your footprint. So I'm anticipating that when you add all of these incentives together, you as a property owner are going to be able to expand your footprint. And it's gonna be a much better modern footprint that you'll get a better bang for your buck on your property values than what we have in our existing code on that.
May I add a few more?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it very much.
We also reduced the rear setback from 100 feet along the
75.
north side of Big Caves Road. Brooke Brown, we also reduced the rear setback from a required 100-foot green belt to a 75-foot green belt. So that's 25 feet on the front and 25 feet on the back. And we also allow any use that was retail to be conducted on a building, previously zoned office building, and vice versa. Any property that was retail can now also have office uses. And we've increased the height to 2 stories on the north side of Big Caves Road, where it was previously below that. We've also updated modern signage. And so, let's see if there's anything else here. I think those were the only things I wanted to add.
Yeah,
And we would mandate, if approved, shared driveways and shared access.
and that's a biggie.
Yeah.
And so this does allow a lot of different other activities that went on that could do this. So, you know, we're no magic. If there's something that comes up, or if you've heard of a business that has a different request, I think it should be included in the pass along to the city council to consider on that as we go through this. But I think all in all, you're going to see that this does have some, hopefully will have some benefits to allow this transition from what we have to what we would prefer to have, both from an economic standpoint and from a survey and user comments that we've received from our citizens on that. You know, the walkability factor was incredible as to the number of people that came in and said, look, I want to be able to walk down to BK's Road and do something and be safe to do it. So, you know, we have a number of options on that. Obviously, Edge Grove is not a preferred walking method to get across the creek, but we also have plenty of room there to put a pedestrian bridge that would be go there. And you know, remember, Rollingwood does own 3.5 or 5 acres. It's almost 5 acres when you take it into consideration. It goes actually from Edge Grove all the way to BK's Road. Now, a lot of that is in the floodplain, but several years ago, we actually commissioned the city engineers to draft out a plan to raise that up and to channelize that creek that would allow us to do it. We did not go in and implement that at that time because we wanted to do that in relationship to what was going on in BK's Road on that. But if you look at our usage we have there and what could be given that area that's back behind there. So, and I want to emphasize one thing. When we went through all of this, one of our overriding deals was to protect our neighbors on Timberline and all of the cul-de-sacs that went in there, because it's been that's a tough time for some of them when they've had these buildings come up. There's a lot of history in several of these buildings that kind of just predate Rollingwood having very strong city government. One of the buildings actually, the plans only have called for, it's on the south side, but called for a 3-story building, and they went, well, what the heck, we'll just put on another story, which they did, and you know, and it was there for probably 10, 15 years before we would allow them to get a CO for that floor. We've ultimately
They just built it.
They just built it. But that's that happened back in the day, and it just,
Wow.
we have, and I do want to emphasize one other thing so that P&Z knows this. On the north side of BK's Road, from Dry Creek, generally to almost to the corner, to the triangle, those businesses are not on sewer. They are still on septic system, including the Palisades and those other buildings there. Those little small buildings that retail and the office buildings there.
And there was just no practical way to get them on sewer? is my
No,
understanding.
we had the plan to do that, but at the time, you would be going down BK's Road. That section of BK's Road was in phase 2 of the TxDOT plan to improve BK's Road. And if we put the sewer there and it happened to be in where their right-of-way was, we had to move it. So we thought, okay, we'll wait until, but who knew it was gonna be 25 years before or 20 years before they did that. So once that is finalized and we know where that is, that could be added fairly easily to that. So the good part is it's all slopes down to the pipe that's there now. There's a pipe behind the finish line that they could tie in that would come in on that. So it's all downhill. So
All right. Okay.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
Thanks
So
for
we've
as
had-
well. Appreciate it.
any other questions or anything I could add, I'd be glad to try to.
I have a couple of questions. That's okay.
All right, okay, Tony, what have you got?
I'm curious, does any of this prevent somebody, if a building owner, property owner, wanted to come to the city and try to do a PUD to negotiate bespoke zoning? Does any of this prevent that?
It doesn't prevent it. Now, 5 acres is the minimum PUD size in Rollingwood. And if you went in and assembled, did an assembly, you could do that. We have 2 commercial PUDs on BK's Road, plus a residential PUD.
Has there been any thought to shrinking the 5 acres? I mean, my thought is just if somebody owned something smaller and whatever their specific use was gonna be, something that we wanted, let's say retail, and if we could,
That-
move some things around, we could make it viable.
That was brought up, and we discussed that, and the issue is, on a PUD, it's basically a negotiated deal between that owner and a city council. If the city council at that time wanted to do something that was adverse to what we received as information to the citizens, that was the block. They just considered that to be something that they would prefer not to see on that. Can the city do that anytime they want to? Yes, they just have to change that ordinance and reduce it to whatever it is.
Brooke Brown, I recall one other point of discussion on that, and that was if you made it smaller than 5 acres, if you reduce that 5 acres, then it would disincentivize owners to get together and develop larger tracts, which is another incentive we wanted to promote, is that some of these smaller tracts get together and develop as one larger tract.
But I think that there's nothing, the 5 acres could be, I mean, the city could look at that later. I think that there's probably more pushback on reducing that than leaving it there. If somebody came in, I think the city could consider that at that time on that. I'm not sure what advantages, just a history of what we went through with the other PUDs. Probably the last one was Rollingwood Town Center, which is the Endeavor PUD. And that was the interesting part about that is they could have built the same square footage without a PUD as they could do it. The only difference that we ended up as a city is we got everything moved back towards the road from where they could have built it on that. And they got some benefits, and we got some benefits. So I think that was a smart move to do that. But they could have, I mean, it was basically same square footage. They didn't gain any square footage from doing a PUD to speak of. So
What's the residential PUD that you mentioned?
we own, there's 24 residential homes that's located on the south side of BK's Road. It is called Tremont PUD, and it enters off of right there at the creek. Well, no, it won't go. It's not Montebello. It's the next turn.
The next one, yeah.
That goes up to the CM building, which I don't know what it's called now, but it's that turn that's, there's two.
I see it on the map now. Yeah,
Okay.
Tremont Drive and
Yeah.
Bee Cave Road.
Yeah. And that's been highly successful. They were smaller lots, obviously, but it's been been a good, I guess it was done 25, 30 years ago. Been a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have an exit that goes out into Tremont proper behind there to the south.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry for that
no,
relatively unrelated question, but thank you.
Okay. We've had a lot of opportunity to discuss this last week and continued discussion with presentations here this week. I know that one of the concerns last week was that Commission may not have had enough opportunity to review all the material. There was a lot of it. And would hope that you'd all taken advantage of this past week to catch up if you needed to. And if there needs to be some additional discussion, let's get that going. And if not, then I think I'm ready for someone to make a motion.
Mike, I know
My
you.
apologies for being late, by the way.
I'm
I was
glad you
stuck in
came,
the
Mike.
Mopac parking lot.
Yeah,
for an
okay,
hour.
let the record show that Mike showed up at
No need-
6:33.
No need to apologize. I think you had some questions outstanding from last meeting. Did you have some of those answered? Do you want to?
I think I missed the whole impervious cover presentation.
Well, I guess
It's actually better than it is existing. The
So-
way Tom explained it, the impervious cover restrictions will be modified to make it easier rather than more restrictive, which I didn't quite understand before Tom was talking also.
I don't want to subject anyone. I mean, I think I left the last meeting and I went and spent a little time just looking through TCAD and pulling some data that I shared with Brooke and others, and it was not by any means like terribly precise. It was just like what I could get on the internet relatively quickly, and it appeared to me that there are some existing properties with impervious cover greater than 60%. And so, it was just like, well, I think that doesn't provide much incentive if people have greater impervious cover and they have to take a step back. But perhaps this was discussed because you're smiling. And maybe there's some grandfathering that I'm not aware of, but in any event, that was kind of one of my bigger concerns.
Dave, Mr. Chairman, I don't mind going over that point real quickly if it's okay.
Mike, do you need that?
If everyone else is happy with it,
What?
then
Yeah.
I'm happy to.
I think Mike had a question about it. If Mr. Farrell doesn't mind, real briefly
I
telling
just
you.
hope I say the same thing again, that's all. So we'll try. Mike, the answer to that is that because we're modifying the parking requirements, and let's say that you have a building that's 60% impervious cover, a good portion of that is gonna be parking, because that counts as the impervious cover, and that is the majority of that deal. So we have three ways that we're addressing the parking that makes this, it gives you the opportunity to expand your building without going over a 50% impervious cover limit. One, we're gonna, one of the suggestions is to do away with parking requirement. That'd be one. Two, allow you to obtain parking on a third-party site. And the third way is that the city of Rollingwood owns several acres, 5 acres. It's somewhere between 3.5 and 5 acres, and I apologize, I can't remember for the life of me what it is. But it's behind a lot of these properties on Edgegrove. And part of the thought was this could be used as lease to these buildings as or these projects as new parking spaces there. So that would eliminate a lot of the impervious cover that you have on your property while allowing you to expand your footprint of the building that you want to really use on that. So that's the intent that we're trying to get at.
And can you park in a floodplain? No issue with parking in a floodplain?
You would have to answer your question, I would say no. I hope our ordinance would prohibit you from doing that, because I've pulled enough people out of that damn creek without having to do it again. But we did have our engineers go through and do the calculations and the proposal to
get it out.
channelize that creek so that you would raise it out, you'd have sufficient of it out of there to do that. Now, could we use that for some other use? But there you're abutting residential properties that make a difference on that. So this would be kind of a moderate use that would be, not hurt our people on South Crest, the homeowners right there, and still allow those buildings that I agree are there to do that. Now, the final thing, which I don't think I mentioned before, is there's an economic obsolescence on buildings built in the 70s and early 80s that they're gonna go down regardless, because you get to a point where renovation is not gonna be able to bring that up. Now, remember, we are changing the use. If a lot of these buildings that you're talking about are right now used primarily for office space. And some of them, and some of them are not. But we're proposing that you can we're gonna have one zoning, and you can use that zoning for office or retail on that. So you may end up with a mixed-use building if it's 2 stories. You may have office and you may have that. I don't wanna try to project what our entrepreneurs or what a developer that has a better idea is gonna come in and do on these properties. I don't think that's the role of the city to do that. We're trying to offer some alternatives to convert some of these uses. We're not gonna go in and tell a property owner that they have to stop what they're doing with their current use. They can leave it like it is, and nothing bad happens on that. But this gives them some further options that they didn't have with the current code. So, did that help?
Yeah, I mean, so if someone is at 65, 70% impervious cover, and maybe Bryce knows the answer to this, I don't know, but can they redevelop and keep that same amount of impervious cover?
Our current code does not, go ahead.
I got an answer for you because I was looking at the non-conforming earlier. Yes, so they're going to be existing non-conforming until I touch it. That's the issue. Now, likely the reality to it is they may not, because they're going to have to scrape a lot of stuff out, and they may have a different orientation to take advantage of other pieces of the code, so on and so forth.
But so if they remove it, if they're going to redevelop, they have to come back to
I
within
can't
code.
bring myself into greater nonconformity, and I can't maintain that nonconformity by just moving it. So I got what I got. I can't add more, right? So for example, if I'm readjusting how I'm doing this and I want to move my building up, etc., I may not be able to put parking back where that was, or pieces like that, because I've removed that paving.
But you're not gonna have to put as much parking
Correct.
as you had there before. So you may be able to put more into the actual building, more impervious cover into the actual building,
Yeah,
less in the park.
And
I
I want
think
to
that's a
put the parking
market
in,
driven.
Yeah.
Just like you said, you don't want to guess
It
what
is.
developers are going to
Yep.
do. That's what that is, right?
to put into context the parking for everybody, because I think this is going to be the shocker here is, so Tom mentioned earlier, right now in the code, the parking requirement for retail is 1 parking space for every 200 gross square feet of retail space. The parking space is 18 by 9 or 18 by 10. With drive aisle, I'm well over 200 square feet. So I have basically a 1-to-1 parking space, like parking area to building square footage area. Even with just what is proposed as the amendment that's drafted, we're already bumping that up to 250 is the most restrictive piece. And depending on your building orientation and how you choose to develop, that can even go up to 500. And again, the committee has even recommended to do away with the parking requirements entirely, which is something that Austin has done. No new development in Austin has parking requirements anymore, and allowing that to be market driven. And so again, not going to say I'm going to get 50% of the lot as a building, but I'm going to get a more reasonable ratio based on that market condition and what that developer feels is appropriate for that building, which it will equate directly to more square footage of building.
Yeah, usable,
Absolutely.
usable impervious cover versus, or I guess, square footage.
One more brief comment. Also, with the 2-story allowance or 3-story on the south side, you can also double up on the parking. Think, for example, the building, retail, commercial use building at 6th and Lamar. There's several retail stores on the lower level. There's office on the second level. There's a standard ground level parking, 2 aisles, and then the third aisle is a double 2-story parking. If you can envision that piece of property, so you could think also about the parking being able to be doubled, so that your impervious cover, you could get the same amount of parking in half the impervious cover footprint.
I have a question. The one where Wildflower is?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And
Catty corner to Whole Foods.
I think the bottom line is, we're not going to tell people that they have to change. And-
Yeah, I understand that. I was just
And if they don't change, are we gonna have, and let's say nothing happens, we do this. One, this is some options that currently the code does not allow you as a property owner to pursue. 5 years goes by. We don't see the changes we want. We may have to come back to you. And that's just the way this life is, because we don't know what the market's gonna be driven on. It's a market-driven deal, I agree. And if you're a property owner, you're gonna look at the economic obsolescence of what you have, you're gonna look at the current usage you can do, and you're gonna look at what the numbers are gonna look like when you rebuild it, and that pertains to the impervious cover, all the limitations we have. We're reducing all of those requirements in this code. We're giving you, we're taking out some issues about the front and rear setbacks are gonna be reduced. So I think you're gonna see that hopefully this will be enough impetus to see us come, get some changes that we have, that we desire on Bee Caves Road on this. This is the second time we've gone through Rollingwood, Bee Caves Road. We had the corridor study, and surprisingly, 25 to 30 years ago, our citizens wanted the same things they wanted this time. Hopefully we can get something that we can deliver for them on that. So,
I think the biggest challenge we have is the one we can't control, which is market forces, and their unique shape, size lots. Unfortunately, I don't think there's enough space to do structured parking, to create that scenario, and I think doing away with parking is a good idea. Let market forces, dictate, but you, practically speaking, need parking. I mean, unfortunately, there's not enough of us residents to support, on our own, a viable business. They're gonna be relying upon auto traffic. And, we had on the south side of BK's for a long time, we had some great retail restaurant uses, and they all failed due to lack of parking, and we've got all medical office there now.
Surprisingly, that's been the tale of the West Bank, not just Rolling,
Yeah.
but the West Bank. For 40 years I've lived here. Our restaurants come and they go very quickly on that. There isn't one point of that I'll make. Yes, we don't have a single lot that has a structured deal, but just getting back to your point about putting together a PUD site or consolidation of some sites, then because we are allowing parking on third-party sites, you could have a centralized parking deal, which has been very popular on, say, South Congress and Lamar, for instance. And unfortunately, I think we have to be cognizant of what the competition in the marketplace is, and that is what our marketplace competition is on this. So, thank y'all, and if there's any other questions, I'll be glad to try to address them on that.
Yeah, I think the other market force challenge is opportunity cost, you gotta vacate your tenants and lose your revenue while you develop, and usually the trade-off for that in the city of Austin is, look at Brody Oaks, you take a bunch of single-story, now we're building giant high-rises, you create so much more density, and I'm not remotely a proponent of going above 2 stories because we have all the residential, but that's gonna be a major market force limitation, is you just can't generate the magnitude of additional density to justify the opportunity cost of moving all your tenants out for 2 to 3 years. But it's a challenge. You got to take steps in the right direction, and then hopefully, at a minimum, you get feedback from, maybe it spurs discussion amongst the commercial owners, and they start to formulate plans, and maybe they approach us with a consolidated PUD or something along those lines. But I think it's, I think this is, incredible work that everybody's done, an incredible amount of time to move in a positive direction, and then we're gonna have to see if it's gonna be enough.
Thank y'all.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Any additional discussion? All right.
I'd like to move to adopt a composite draft with the changes as recommended by Mr. Fleming.
We have a motion.
I'll second the motion.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion?
What are the changes as, what does that mean? Are we referring to the red line that's in the
That's
packet?
right, the
Okay,
red
that's,
line.
thank you. Yeah, I think we need to get something up there. I think we've done a great job.
Yeah.
We've got a great commission doing awesome work, and I like what I'm seeing. There's a couple of things that I think we don't have the final say. This is recommending it up to city council to adopt, right?
That's correct, yes.
I think this all sounds good. I was curious why we had as prohibited uses veterinarians and music studios. And I also thought the words roof design, in the roof design section, there's a thing that we do need to, it'll be designed to maximize aesthetic appeal, which sounds terribly vague and hard to enforce, and I don't know what that would really mean. So I would have city council take a look at those provisions and see if they've got different thoughts or ways to wordsmith that. But those were the only things that I saw. So I'm only putting it on the record since we're getting ready to vote, and those
Good
would be
enough.
the things I'd note.
Yep, thanks for that. Okay. All right. Additional? Okay, given the importance of this piece of work here, I thought that it would be appropriate, and the impact that it's gonna have on the city. I thought that it would be good for us to do a roll call vote. So I'm just gonna ask individually if you'd vote up or down, yea or nay. So I'm gonna start with Mike Rhodes.
Sure. Yay.
Okay. Jeannie?
Yes.
Tony?
I vote yes. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Brian?
I was waiting for you to call me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a yay. I'm a yes.
Jerry?
I'm a yay.
Okay. And I'm gonna vote yea as well. So, we have a vote of 6-0. It looks like the yeas carry, and congratulations. Looks like it passed.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Moving on to regular agenda item number 3. It's kind of the follow-on to what we had just voted on, and I'm gonna read this whole thing? Okay, I'll read the whole thing. It is discussion and possible action regarding the rezoning and the following parcels of land from professional and business district C1 and business district C2 to commercial district C. They are 5100 Rollingwood Drive, 2901 Bee Cave Road, 3160 Bee Cave Road, 3144 Bee Cave Road, 3102 Bee Cave Road, 2900 Bee Cave Road, 3103 Bee Cave Road, 2826 Bee Cave Road, 3101 Bee Cave Road, 2829 Bee Cave Road, 1015 Bee Cave Woods Drive, 2824 Bee Cave Road, 3012 Bee Cave Road, 2814 Bee Cave Road, 3010 Bee Cave Road, 2808 Bee Cave Road, 3008 Bee Cave Road, 2802 Bee Cave Road, 3001 Bee Cave Road, 2800 Bee Cave Road, 3006 Bee Cave Road, 2724 Bee Cave Road, 2720 Bee Cave Road, 2714 Bee Cave Road, 2712 Bee Cave Road, 2710 Bee Cave Road, 2708 Bee Cave Road, 2706 Bee Cave Road, 2700 Bee Cave Road, Travis County Appraisal District property ID numbers 721173 and 105621.
Sorry, we didn't catch all that one.
Water. Do we have anybody who needs to speak on this?
Well, I was going to
issue?
say, I'm happy to
Yeah.
address Gene's question from earlier. So with regard to the piece of property at 5100 Rollingwood Drive, it is currently zoned commercial. It is included in this rezoning because if council ends up adopting the amendment, we're going to be doing away with C1 and C2. So we still need zoning on it. My recommendation is going to be to include it in commercial. However, I have talked to staff about this, and staff can work with the property owner, and our recommendation would be to rezone it to be residential. We've got a process for that. And then in the future, because it is, it's kind of in that kind of transitional area that it could be commercial, but it's currently residential. In the future, if somebody bought it and wanted to develop it as commercial, they could come and ask and request to rezone it to commercial. So a little bit of background also on this. In the city's current code, residential is not a permitted use in either C1 or C2. Mm-hmm. So the property already is what we call non-conforming or existing non-conforming, meaning it existed at a time when that was allowed. The codes over time have changed, and it's no longer allowed. However, it's continued. The use is allowed to continue in existence, but there's certain rules about the ability to expand it over time, etc. And so ultimately, because it is built as a residential lot, our recommendation is let's look at zoning it residential so that they comply with the same requirements, because we all know that there are very different requirements in Rollingwood for the residential district than all of the other districts. And so I think the best way to kind of handle that is to have it follow those same residential rules, since it is a residential property.
Now, can we take care of this evening with a recommendation?
No.
We
So
cannot.
it's going to require new noticing and all of that stuff, and
Yeah.
so that's why our recommendation is let's keep moving forward with the rezoning.
Okay.
And Mr. Wright can get with city staff, and we can work with him to go ahead and start even noticing for rezoning to from commercial to residential, and so that we can get that maybe at the next P&Z meeting or at the next council meeting after the property has been rezoned. That way, it kind of all falls together in a nice little item. We don't have any outstanding issues that are looming or lingering. And this way, also by not removing it or anything, we're not going to end up with a property that has zoning but no
Right.
regulation attached to it.
Just out of curiosity, is it currently C1 or C2?
It is. Sorry, let me look
C1?
at this. I think it is C1. I think
Okay,
that is
C1.
correct.
Business office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
Thank you.
we, so I have a
Yes,
question. So sometimes, most of what we do is like a recommendation that then goes to the city council. I think there's a limited number of things like replats or something of that nature where we just
We do.
actually have the authority to
We
decide.
do, that's right.
Is the zoning question like rezoning this as residential
Mhm.
later or rezoning it now as we're doing, is that a recommendation up to city council? Or is this one of those things that are within our,
Sure. So what it is it's a recommendation. So P&Z for all things zoning is a recommending body only. So just like with the code amendment,
Okay.
rezoning follows a very similar process. It's got slightly different noticing provisions in the city, depending on what it is. The other nice thing about this one, I'll say it because staff's going to like this piece, is rezoning from commercial to residential, much easier for noticing because that's only 250 feet. Because Rolling Wood's got a requirement that anytime we're rezoning to other than residential, it requires citywide mailed notice. So much softer noticing provisions, a lot easier to pull together, much quicker, and less costly to the city.
Very good.
I've
That's
got a
great
question
Yeah.
that I could foresee coming up. I think we should absolutely change it to residential. One thing I could see is we make that change, and then let's just say Gene goes to sell it. Turns out one of the commercial owners wants to buy it to have a cleaner site, wants to rezone it to commercial. Now you've got to notice everybody, and now these residential homes that back up to it likely may have an objection to it changing from residential to commercial,
back to
even though it's always been commercial. Is there any way to memorialize, that it was and some sort of automatic adjustment?
So I'll go the opposite way on that as far as like property owner expectation and things like that. While it is zoned commercial, it is built as residential, right? It's a house that is there. So the common person who is not affiliated with local government, which is a good chunk of your community, is not looking at zoning. They're like, well, that's a residential property. It's got a house on it. It's my neighbor. I know him. Versus, oh, I didn't realize that was commercially zoned property right there. And so, to your point, I think it is relevant that we wouldn't want to do that, that you do want to allow that notification process to be there, so that those owners can be informed of it and folks can file objection if they have any. A lot of our code amendment is focused on that transition that we just talked about, the transition between residential property and commercial property, creating buffers, creating space. We also have that special exception for some of these properties, specifically, that are very close to residential in that triangle area, that may be a little closer and don't have the depths needed for some of those items, so they can go through that special exception process, maybe have a shorter buffer that's got denser planning in it or something like that, to be able to utilize that space while minimizing the impact on those adjacent residents.
It's funny, but when we do this, if we take this vote and pass it, that it's going to make this little piece of property a whole lot more available to things. It could do something completely different from what it is today. We're expanding the possibilities for this small piece of property by just changing this here.
And
Not
so
that
the
you wanna
way
do that.
I understand what you're saying is
Yeah.
it's easy,
And then
it's much easier
somebody wants to buy
to go from commercial to residential than it is to go from residential to commercial.
Just from a procedural standpoint.
So in actuality, it might be easier to leave it commercial and let the future buyer decide what they want to do. I don't know, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, and again, right, because a lot of this has to do with what the homeowner's goal is in some of this, right? Like, so we've got certain rules about expansion of the use, et cetera. I mean, it's allowed to be legal non-conforming. The house can be bought and sold as is to a new owner. That use will transfer with that, so long as it meets the occupancy requirements in the code.
I bring this up because I'm wondering if we want to leave this one off of this list.
So again, I don't want us to leave it off, and I'm going to strongly recommend you don't
Yeah.
do that.
Okay.
Because if that happens, I'm going to be left with one property in the city zone C1,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to have any zoning text regulation
Right.
associated with Z1.
Okay.
So today it's commercial. The same problem that exists as it relates to residential is just being carried over. So that's already a problem in the current code. The language is identical, which allows for those uses allowed in the residential district with the exception of dwelling uses and, thank you, subdivision sales office. I was like, oh, I've almost got it. Subdivision sales offices and dwelling uses.
Okay.
So, because there's some other things that are allowed in in the residential district. And so, again, what I don't want us to end up with is I'd like us to maintain having zoning on all properties that is supported by the text.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to work with the property owner. Because again,
Yeah.
right now it's zoned commercial. The current zoning is proposing to keep it that way. If the property owner would like it changed, we can absolutely visit with them and go through that process and bring that back forward at a future date.
All right.
Do we know if it conforms to the residential lot requirements, width, size?
From what he was describing, it very likely does.
Okay. 15,000 square
Yeah.
feet, yeah.
I just didn't, I don't have minimum width to it. I know it looks like it's narrow and deep.
With the survey, if you'd like to see one.
Oh, I don't think that's needed at the moment, but thank you. It is definitely a larger lot in town. I know we've got some that are smaller than this.
Yeah, my
so-
specific question was it's appears on the map to be narrower than most, but much deeper than most. I was wondering if we had a width requirement that,
It's 100 foot.
so as far as we know, it's 100 feet.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. That's why I was wondering if if we knew whether it was 100 feet or not.
There is an issue with,
Okay.
In that comprehensive plan, on the triangle pieces of property, which we included this, on Rollingwood Drive, the setback is maintained as to what it's been. So it's not, we did not reduce the setbacks on Rollingwood Drive for that triangle piece of properties on that. So, because we wanted to protect those homeowners that could cross the street from there too. So that would, Dave, I don't know if that gives you any solace.
Which is,
I understand what you're saying.
I'm trying to make sure that nothing goes wrong here.
I know.
You know what I'm saying? I really want the homeowner to get what he wants, but I don't want us to vote something in that is going to preclude him from getting there. That's
Yeah.
it.
The other thing, Gene, is that there is a small fee to do a subdivision unless the city institutes it. If the city starts the rezoning, then there is no fee. So you want to make sure, Gene, you want to make sure that the city actually does this rather than you doing it. You can ask them to do it.
thank you, Tom.
So, but there, I don't know if that'll help make that decision, but
Okay.
I understand, Dave, what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, thank you. I don't want to sound like a dope, so.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking my question too. I don't want to gotcha down the road.
Right,
That-
exactly.
There's such a topological break as you go down Rollingwood Drive. You meet my property, the west end of my property, and there's a drop where the cars that park in the parking lot. Below that, the roofs of the cars are below the driveway that's
Uh-huh.
above it. So, people see a natural break in the property. There's residential stuff across the street, there had been residential stuff along, they're gonna think this is a residence stuff. And so I think, that's the way a buyer would approach it, and then to be suddenly confronted with the fact that, yeah, but if you wanna make it a residence, you have to get a zoning change, it'd probably throw cold water on the sale.
Yes, you're probably right.
So one option that I may also offer up in a motion that can be made is that you could motion to recommend to City Council to approve the rezoning And along with that, include a recommendation for city council to consider city-initiated rezoning for 5100 Rollingwood Drive to residential.
And I think that's where I was headed. I think that's where I would like to go. Yeah. Yeah, to kind of squelch the gotchas. All right. Anyone want to make a motion here or any additional discussion? Go ahead,
Or look
Jeannie.
something up.
I seem to be the only one making motions.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I carried the heavy stuff last meeting. I made a lot of motions. And a couple meetings ago,
You know,
Before.
I can make.
I'm
a-
ready to second though.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm afraid to make a motion because I think you have to read this whole thing, right?
No. I think you can make a motion to
Take the action
approve it
proposed
as
tonight.
stated with the proviso that we are going to make an additional recommendation to city council.
Yeah.
We good with that?
Mhm.
See, our legal counsel says you don't have to read the whole thing.
Wow.
I was trying to see if TCAD told us how wide that lot is, but it doesn't.
Well,
And Jeannie, you want it rezoned to residential, is that correct? I guess I missed
Of
maybe
the
missed that part.
options that face me tonight, yeah, that would be the best. I have no idea of how to deal with it as a commercial property,
Yeah.
right? To want to do that, I never thought about doing it, and I've consulted friends and family who are in the real estate business, and they're all in residential, and they say they don't know anything about commercial. It's just very different to deal with. So from a simplicity point of view on my part, it would be more convenient if it were residential.
Okay.
Are you sure about that? Do you want to take some more time, or do you want us to, you know?
Well, I mean, it's gonna go before the council. I'm gonna work with staff on it. I think I'll have enough time.
I think, yeah, it's gotta get renoticed.
Yeah.
So if he decides it's not something he wants, then
Yeah.
I think
Then
it'll
it's
just,
gonna be commercial.
it'll stay commercial.
Okay.
I mean, it's easy to kill it, it's hard to get it started.
Right. Okay. Okay. So then, Mike, are you ready to
Oh,
make a
do you-
motion?
Okay, I'll motion to approve agenda item 5 as written with the recommendation.
I think
three.
it's agenda item number 3.
Man, you blew it. Oh, God.
Oh, I'm looking at the old agenda. Excuse me. Excuse me.
You're good. It's a new day.
But it's the same item.
It's a new day.
it is.
Okay, I will move to approve agenda item 3 as written with the one recommendation to have council initiate, or the city initiate residential zoning for 5100 Rollingwood.
Okay.
Second.
All right. We have a motion. We have a second. Any additional discussion? I'm sorry?
Tony beat
Tony.
me. Tony
Tony's
got
done.
it. Oh.
Okay. All right. Okay. We have a motion. We have a second. Any additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes carry.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Nicely done.
Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
All right, we'll move along to regular agenda item number 4, which is discussion on recommendations from the CRCRC regarding the residential tree ordinance. You'll recall that last week we started into this and there was, again, some concern that we're dropping too much into y'all's lap without really having an opportunity to fully review. Plus, there was some concern from a CRCRC standpoint that it doesn't necessarily map perfectly to what the recommendations are from the commercial corridor piece. So I've invited Jay Van Babel to come back and provide another opportunity for some additional discussion around this thing, with the idea that we're not going to approve the go forward of this, these recommendations, but rather take your input and incorporate them into whatever final recommendations that might come. So I'm just opening the floor to that right now to, if you have some questions you want to direct to Jay, otherwise he's going to step through his package and just ask you if you, yes, Jeannie.
I have a couple of questions. As I read through it and heard you last week, I have a concern that that planting too many trees will end up with a density on each lot that is really counterproductive to the lot. And I guess one of my perspectives is that I'm sure Tom will remember 30 years ago when Peak Road lost most of its trees because the density was too much. And we had oak wilt and other things that went through. I mean, Peak Road still has a lot of trees, but we lost half of them. And as I was reading through this, I guess my biggest question is, why are we requiring the removal of a large tree and with the replacement of 3 new trees or whatever? And I'm not sure that is actually productive.
I'll say one comment on that. When I bought my house, there's no tree ordinance or anything. And one of the first things I did, because I love the trees and the neighborhood and everything, was I got an arborist over to just evaluate everything. What do I need to do to keep my trees healthy and everything? I forget the exact numbers, but I think I had 98 trees on my lot or something. And the first thing they recommended is to cut down 30 some odd of them.
Yeah. Give 'em
So the other,
space.
they actually recommended cutting even more down that that were oaks. So to your point, there's, even we replant some of these trees, depending on what the other tree cover is. I've planted probably 10 small trees over the last 2 years, and I think one of them has lived because the tree canopy, they don't get
That's
any
right,
sun.
they don't get enough sun, they don't have enough water.
But
I mean, that's just
not
a
all
concern.
trees are the same. It's not, a tree has to reach a certain maturity before it's considered protected. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. I think the intention was not to increase the number of trees in Rollingwood, but to preserve and protect, especially the protected trees and what we introduced as a new classification, heritage trees, that we currently have. These trees are from 50 to 100 years old. So the way the ordinance is written now, there is a 3-to-1 substitution for a protected tree that you take out of the setback areas. One of the points in this recommendation is to reduce that to 2-to-1. You might just think that maybe it should just be 1-to-1. So we're open to, discussion and comments and changes on those ratios. But the overall purpose we had was to maintain and protect the current tree canopy, not to enlarge it, not to increase the number of trees.
When you say 3-to-1, is it for every one tree you take out, you have to plant 3?
Yes, if you take out a protected tree, let's say, for example, an oak tree, a live oak tree, from your front yard setback that's 12 inches in diameter, you have to replace it with 3 trees from the protected species list, and they would have to be 3 inches in diameter or more.
Well, but that is increasing the number of trees, right?
That's what's in the current ordinance right now, yes.
And I know that we're going down to 2-to-1, but I think I think Jeannie's point, so for what it's worth, I did talk with an arborist and then 2 landscape architects to get their sense in the week in between. And by restricting it, so there's a couple of things. So one of the things that I saw was that it used to say in the code, or the current code says you can plant new trees somewhere else as well. It doesn't have to be your lot. And I remember your comment last time was like, well, I don't think anybody's taking advantage of that, so let's just take that out. But one of the things I kind of got feedback on was, well, to the density point, if you're saying that for every 1 tree you take out, you've got to put in 3 trees, or 2, even if we reduce to 2, and you're only working with, say, I think the minimum lot size in Rollingwood, according to codes, like a 1/3 acre, thereabouts. That doesn't support that many trees, especially if what you're trying to encourage are like, what you ultimately want for Rollingwood, I think, is like the big, tall, beautiful oak tree, right? Not like a little scrub tree. And with that kind of density, you don't end up getting the big, beautiful tree over the course of 30 years. You get a bunch of little trees fighting for space, and it really is a net negative in terms of creating that like wood-like environment. So I think that would be part of the feedback I had for today, was just rebalancing what we're doing from a density standpoint, because I think that could be problematic. It's an unintended consequence, I think, if we're saying for every tree you take out, you have to put in more than the tree that you took out, plus it all has to be on the same lot. Then you might end up, especially if they already have existing trees, there might not be a good spot to put it. Because I actually had like a landscape come out to my place, and I was like, oh, I'd like to put in and make a big, beautiful Monterey oak. And they're like, maybe in that corner? You know, like there's not many spots in my yard where they thought that it'll grow to be a big tree, because there's so much other coverage. And not just from my existing trees, but also my neighbor's trees. It makes it kind of tough.
I think when this ordinance was originally written, the idea was that if you take out a 12-inch oak tree and you replace it with, as in other ordinances in Austin and Westlake and Leander, I believe you have to replace it with a 12-inch oak tree. Well, that's pretty impossible economically and as far as arborists go. I mean, you can't find the trees.
You need like a huge
No, it's
crane.
replacing
Yeah.
caliper inches. It's not tree size. But it depends. It varies, but whatever. I mean, it's like you can't. Yeah, you can't. I mean, you can buy a 12-inch tree.
You can, and then people would complain about the $30,000 that it would cost to, find the tree somewhere, and you got to dig it out, root ball and all, and take it in and replant it. So I'm not an arborist, so I don't know all the details of that, but that's why they made it. They wanted to replace diameter, so the current rule replaces 75% of the diameter. So a 12-inch tree removed has to be replaced with 3 trees from a protected species of 3 inches or more. So that's 9.
4 inches.
9 out of 12. Is it 4 inches?
4 inches. Yeah.
4 inches. Okay. Now that would be 100% replacement. I'm pretty sure it's 3 inches.
Yeah. Okay.
So it'd be 9. You'd replace 9-inch diameters, but you would take 3 trees to do it. I mean, feasibly, you could say when you remove a 12-inch tree with a permit, then you replace it with one, whatever you want to count, a 6-inch tree. There are so I just want to make a sort of a general statement of how we went about this process. The 3 subcommittee members analyzed. We took our directive to do something to improve the ordinance, to further protect and maintain the current tree canopy, which is very important to your residents. We did this by looking at not only our own ordinance very, very carefully, but also looked at Austin's ordinance, Westlake's ordinance, and Leander's ordinance. And if you had to rank those on which is the strictest, Westlake is number 1. They really don't allow you to remove anything. Next would be Austin, and then third would be Leander, and then fourth would be Rollingwood. We really have probably the weakest tree ordinance of those 4 communities. So would it be helpful for me to go through the recommendations one at a time and just get discussions on each one?
I
Same
think-
ones we did last week?
Yes.
I don't think so. I mean, I thought it was a great,
You did-
thorough presentation.
Yeah, I hate to make you go through all of that again. You did a good job. I think part of what I wanted was some time to digest what some of these were, get a chance to get some input from people that know more about trees than I do, and then have an opportunity for us all to discuss it before we were voting on it. But I guess it's not a possible action. It's really just more, it's discussion and then providing recommendations back to CRC based on what we're seeing based on the proposal.
Yeah, we're sticking our toe in the water here,
Mm-hmm.
seeing if you have concerns that haven't been met with what's being what's in the recommendation so far, and then we can talk those out and see whether or not we wanna make adjustments to it. But, you know, it would be, I think it's to everyone's benefit if we can get as much input into this process as we can beforehand, and probably streamline the approval process later on, because, you know, we've talked to all the concerned stakeholders. So, exactly that. I mean, if there are questions specifically around some of the things that are being mentioned here, I'd invite you to make those questions, you know, voice those questions right now.
Well, I have one question, I have actually two questions. Number 8, removal of heritage trees would require a separate heritage tree removal permit that can only be approved by a majority vote of the city council. So, for example, the house that they're building next door to me, they cut down some large heritage trees, and they're gone. And as far as we're concerned at this point, because they did it before this change was enacted, there's nothing at this point we can do, correct? Okay, so.
If it was done with a valid approved permit.
Right, so that permit would have to be approved prior to any clearing of a lot, really. So before, as a requirement of the building permit process. Okay, so that was my first question. My second question is, and maybe I've just read this too quickly, but what happens when the tree dies? Because we've been in our property a very long time. We had a heritage tree die, and it was probably because of encroachment, because of the people behind us building a garage. But what happens if they die? I mean, you know, do we have, as homeowners, do we have to replace a heritage tree with 3 new ones? I mean, if they just die naturally?
Okay, so on your first point, that's what we're proposing. The city council will approve heritage tree removal. That isn't necessarily what needs to go in our recommendation. That was the strongest, you know, recommendation we could make. There are alternatives. For example, in your commercial corridor tree section, it says a heritage tree removal, special exception, removal of a heritage tree is prohibited unless a heritage tree removal special exception is granted by the Board of Adjustment. Upon a finding that all reasonable efforts have been made to avoid removing the tree, the location of the tree precludes all reasonable access to the property or all reasonable use of the property, and the removal of the tree is not based on a condition caused by the method or design chosen by the applicant to develop the property. So that would be another way to, you know, get a heritage tree removal permit approved, which would not involve going through city council.
On that, I kind of had, you know,
Yeah, second question.
Most ordinances this is Brooke again. Most ordinances, tree protection ordinances I have seen, have a staff approval process to certify that a heritage tree is dead, diseased, or dying to be removed. And so it would be the city arborist, the homeowner would report it to the city arborist would check it, and if the city arborist concurs that it's dead, diseased, or dying, then it would be a staff permit process. I don't know.
And I'm not positive, I'd have to go look back at the ordinance, but I don't think you're forced to replace that if it's removed for that reason.
Okay. Well, and, okay, so that means if my tree dies, I have to go to the city and ask for a permit to pay for the removal of this tree. It cost me a lot of money to remove that tree. It was huge, and it was dead as a doorknob, or whatever that expression is. So I would have had to go to the city. I, of course, did not. But I mean,
Can we get the fine department? I'm just.
Yeah.
I gotta, you know, I'm kind of struggling with the idea of heritage tree status on a couple of bases. Like, I think maybe it's like, because what this ultimately ends up is making a status on a special tree, and anything that's going to happen to it's got to go through city council. That's a real big infringement on a property owner's right to do with their land what they want. And like in, you know, Jeannie's situation, she had one, like maybe it's creating a safety issue for her or something like that. She's got to go get approval from the entire city to take it out. If, you know, I want to say my thought on this.
But I have to pay for it. But I would have to pay for that process, to pay
So-
for the city arborist to come out.
That is an issue not yet, I mean, I don't think we've broached that issue, but it's, the question of whether you wanna, you know, trust the homeowner, that the tree that was cut down is dead, diseased, or dying, or have the arborist confirm it. That's the issue.
Yeah, I guess my concern on this conceptually is like what we're doing is we're taking something that's on somebody's property and saying that doesn't really belong to you, it now belongs to all of us. And we are going to dictate what you get to do with it or not. And I guess to a large extent that's any zoning regulation. But I think I want to be really careful before we start finding things in other people's property that we think are so important that we get to tell them what they can do with it. So that's my biggest concern. I think that like we're using a term like heritage tree. You know, I remember there's some really meaningful, significant, important oaks, right? Like the treaty oak and things like that in the city of Austin. And these things are hundreds of years old and they're huge and they've got big trunks. I'm not sure that I feel that 24 inches in the city of Rollingwood requires this kind of historical protection. You know, I don't know that there's any trees that I'm aware of that certainly that have some kind of history to them that we should be protecting. And then I think on top of that, I'm not aware of any that are so huge. Now, I haven't really studied everybody's yards, so I don't know. Maybe there's some out there that are really cool. But the few that I looked at had definitions of like over 75 years old or 4.5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet. Like those were like the diameters that I was seeing when I was doing a quick skim. And, you know, I can see how that can start being more in the category of this is a super rare tree that's so exceptional that we need to take like community action to preserve it. I don't like the idea that we're doing something exceptional when it's like, oh, that's the type of tree that's on 50% of the yards out there or 30% or something, because that's starting to sound like it's not an exceptional case to me. So I think I'm having trouble, or I'm struggling with that. That would be some of my feedback on that.
Okay, so I want to be clear as I'm listening to this. It seems that you're saying that the 24 inches in of its own is not adequate to define something as a heritage tree, but there might be some measurement that is. Do I hear that? I mean,
yeah, I guess
is that reasonable?
I'm really protective of the idea that like it just seems really tough for me. Like it's like I really like that thing that's on your property, and so I don't want you to ever to be able to do anything with it.
Yeah.
And that to me is a really big thing to say. I mean, it's one to say here's your buildable footprint,
Right.
and that applies to everybody. But when you single out like that property at 5100 Rollingwood has a really cool tree and I don't want him to ever take it down, you know, that to me is like we're doing some dramatic things there. And so I would say that whatever, if we are going to do something like that, it should be such a definition that it's a very rare exceptional circumstance.
Okay. All right.
Can you briefly tell us what Westlake ordinance say?
Not off the top of my head. I seem to remember that I looked at Leander very carefully. The other two members looked at Westlake and Austin. I think in Austin, you could not remove a heritage tree. Now, their definition is 27 inches in Austin, so it's a little bit bigger than what we're stating. And I'm not sure what the Westlake ordinance says. as far as heritage trees.
This one's 72 inches.
Thank
You know, another thought I have with respect to making a recommendation back to the CRCRC is, I have some concern driving around Rollingwood, seeing dead trees that have never been removed. And I would like to perhaps see some kind of, because to me that's a fire hazard, and they break and fall down, and it's a pedestrian hazard, and is there any existing ordinance regarding dead trees?
There is, yes. So we have provisions for dead or diseased trees where we would send a city arborist out there to determine if that's the case. If so, it's declared a public nuisance, and it is a requirement of that property owner to remove those trees that are dead. The arborist goes out to make sure it's not oak wilt or something that we need to be extra aware of.
Sure.
But in the case of just a dead tree, the property owner is required to remove that.
So who is driving around and looking? Because I can tell you some.
We know of a few. Actually, we're working through.
She's got a list.
We've got a new arborist.
No.
Yeah, we're working through a few right now, actually, that were called in, and so if you just let us know about these trees. We don't currently already have an arborist on staff, so our staff can drive around and look and say, yeah, that looks dead, but we have to call an arborist out to do that, so we haven't been necessarily picking them out, but if you were to report something, we would absolutely get an arborist to take a look at it.
Well, and
Okay,
one of our
thank you.
proposal items is to allow a city administrator to assume the job of a city arborist if
Yeah,
one's not
it's-
immediately available. And to your point, as far as I know, the city arborist is paid by the city. They would not be, you would not have to pay for the evaluation that that tree is dead and needs to be removed. You would have to pay for removing it. I don't think there's any provisions for the city taking it out. But
Tom.
There is a fee that you have to pay to cut the tree down. But this would be a good opportunity to make a recommendation that said, if a tree dies naturally and it's a heritage tree, then the city would waive that fee to let you cut it down.
Oh, that would be a nice recommendation.
you mean the tree permit fee? Is it-
Right, yeah, we do
Okay.
currently have the provision that if it is dead or dying for natural causes, the arborist or the city arborist or building official can waive the replacement and the application fee, the permit application fee. Now, if there's a dead tree that they don't remove, the city's allowed to come in and remove that dead tree and charge that to the homeowner if it's a public nuisance and danger, so.
So City of Austin is 50% replacement up to 18.9 inches, caliper inches. 100% replacement, 19 or greater. And I guess Heritage, which it doesn't give the dimension, but trusting is 27, is 300% replacement, just for context.
In terms of, so
So
when
if you
you're
cut
talking
down a
about that
27-inch tree, you're going to replace 81 inches.
81 inches, but yeah.
Not in
obviously-
one tree.
Yeah, not.
Not in, obviously.
That
yeah.
would be nigh on impossible.
That's, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Probably, yeah.
You got like somebody coming in with a crane and a redwood. Like,
Let's just say it would be unconscionably expensive.
What is
Um,
a caliper inch?
Just diameter.
Diameter.
Total
Okay,
diameter.
okay.
yeah.
Are there,
I share some of Brian's concerns. One of my concerns too is the fact that you've got to go and get majority city council approval. I think that kind of, I could see a lot of issues coming from that. You're kind of now politicizing this scenario, or potentially politicizing this scenario too, where, you know, I come in and city council grants me, you know, an exception to take out this tree, and then 5 years from now, my neighbor goes in front of a new city council who has different views and says no, and now we've got two neighbors who got different treatment on their trees.
what if, you know, we at least surfaced the notion of a special exception last week. And what if a special exception were written that would go to the Board of Adjustment, and they would be able to look at the situation that is trying to be handled and compare it against a special exception, and let them make the determination. It wouldn't be so political. It'd be.
Yeah,
Would
I think
that
to the
make
extent
you
you
feel
have
better?
something, I think you strive for
Yeah.
something documented that's a process that's,
Right.
that treats
Put
everything the
process in
same.
place, that's what it would do. Would you be better with that?
That sounds a lot better than a city
Okay.
council approval to me, yeah.
We taking notes?
Yeah, I read the section on the business corridor that suggests using that process. Removal of heritage tree is prohibited unless a special exception is granted by the Board of Adjustment upon finding that all reasonable efforts have been made to avoid removing the tree. In other words, maybe you can redesign your new home somehow. The location of the tree precludes any reasonable access to the property or all reasonable use of the property. And removal of the tree is not based on a condition caused by the method or design chosen by the applicant to develop the property. With something like that,
Well,
do you more-
I'm not an attorney, but I know one. That's a lot of reasonables. So I don't know what.
I
you
think
know,
I would,
how, that's a written policy. I don't know how easy it is to
yeah,
enact.
I think I would.
That's some-
I mean, I think I look at it like a lot of what Brian said, specifically when it comes to heritage trees in the buildable area. I think, you know, the front setback is sort of the precious part of the lot from, you know, the community's perspective. And I think that if there was an exception for something in the front of a lot where clearly people have more flexibility about siding a driveway or something like that. But last week, Michael Hall brought up that he has a heritage tree in the middle of his backyard. And, you know, I don't think we should be asking for permission to remove those. So I think, you know, maybe it's the position of the tree in the lot that
that's in the buildable area.
that dictates the process a little bit to give folks, you know, I mean, you do have flexibility what you do in your setback, but if you've got a lot that, you know, has other issues, topo, what have you, and there happens to be a tree where is the buildable section, then, you know, going to ask council for removal before you can design a house or do anything seems a little onerous.
The front setback is, that's a good point.
I think that's the most
It is a good
important
point.
thing. If we, as we want to try to protect Rollingwood and have it feel like Rollingwood, I mean, the front yards are what
Yeah.
other people enjoy most.
Maybe that's a good way to kind of focus where we're putting restrictions is what's going on in the front setback.
Well, I would think the backyard would be important to your neighbors as well.
And I think the rear setback's good. I mean, the problem there is the power lines. I mean, I had, you know, went out there with those guys and, you know, I had very little say in what was going to happen or not happen with my own trees because of the power lines. And I know y'all have some provisions around distance from power lines.
Right.
I think rear setback, yeah, I think could be treated the same as a front setback, I feel like.
I think it could. I think you'd have to just think about perhaps you would allow for further encroachment into a critical root zone if the tree is in a rear setback. Because if it's sitting right on the 19-foot line and it's a, you know, pretty big tree, can we be a little more tolerant of more encroachment without considering that tree a removed tree?
Yeah, I think the reason why I was getting hesitant about stuff in the backyard is and that's among the notes for where I was going to go with feedback is with the critical root zone aspect and how broad that seems to go, it would make a meaningful impact on your buildable footprint back there if you've got any trees in the backyard. And so that is like a indirect restriction. Like kind of what we were talking about last meeting was how I think we had this plan to try and look at all of these code changes comprehensively and why it made sense to bring them together. And then we talked about how that was creating a little bit of a log jam at CRC, and so maybe we need to break some of them off. But I think this is the reason why I think it makes sense to continue to look at them all together, because if you start tweaking things like critical root zone and how that protects the lot, plus there is a restriction on, you know, height, and then there's a thing going on with the setbacks or impervious cover, all of a sudden, if you're not thinking of all that holistically, you could end up with a significant reduction in the buildable footprint of a lot, which directly affects the value. And that's why I think it makes sense, not to go off on that tangent for too long, but the critical root zone part was my biggest concern. If there's something that maybe gives some flex there when we're talking about it being backyards and side yards, then I'm less concerned. I think with it being in the front setback, I'm not as concerned because you've got a 30-foot sort of zone to work with, and like you said, most of the time driveways you can have some flexibility there on when they get placed.
Well, maybe it's the first 20 feet of a front setback is very protected because you could have a huge tree at 28 feet and it's, it could take up literally half the buildable area with the protected root zone if it's big enough.
Yeah.
And that's
Plus, it could be a hazard to the future foundation of that house, right?
for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. No, and my thought too was like, to the extent that we allow for removal of these trees, that, and I'm very appreciative of all the comments, like, how many trees is too many trees, and I had talked to Alex about this, and we talked about that same issue, and we had kind of floated the concept of, is there some percentage of inches of trees per acre, at which point you don't have to replant, right? So that if you've got an acre, I don't know what the magic number is, that would require some surveying, planning help, whatever.
Arborist.
But, if it's like you've got an acre and you've got 400 caliper inches, but we've just, someone who knows these things is like, 200 is a healthy amount for oaks and cedar elms or whatever our typical species are. Well, you can remove a tree without replacing, instead of treating all these lots, exactly the same. Because like my lot had, I bought it, the house was demoed, and unfortunately they removed trees in the right of way, and there were no ordinances, and we had one tree. So we planted a whole bunch of trees in the right of way, but we needed them, right? And there's other folks that I've seen lots go up, like Tony's example, where he probably has a hard time growing grass, So anyhow, I was thinking about the concept of how can how can we find what that number is and not require folks that have these massive amount of trees to replant. And then when it comes to removal of a heritage tree, I do think if they don't have those say there's a big heritage tree in the middle of one lot and there's no other trees, but it messes up their buildable, they can't really build a house, they need to remove it. I would be in favor of making the replacement significant. Like, make them large trees, make it a lot of inches, so that if you have a 35-inch tree in the middle of one of these lots, it's probably shading almost the whole lot, right? You take it away, you're losing all of it probably. So I think they ought to replace it with 4 or 5 8-inch trees, something that is substantial, that 5 years down the road, we've developed a canopy again.
So I'm hearing that you want to manage it within a certain portion of the lot appropriately with an appropriate replacement plan that would take into account what kind of a tree is being taken out. That all sounds reasonable.
And the size of the lot.
Yeah.
And the size.
And the size of the lot. Now, I wonder, I don't know.
No number of existing trees also,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is there a critical root zone for the 6-inch replacement tree given? Is it 6 foot?
It would be 6 feet, yeah,
Okay.
radius.
Does critical root zone only apply to heritage trees, or does that apply to protected trees?
It would, in our proposal, it would apply to protected trees as well. I just want to say one thing, that we're not proposing that heritage trees cannot be removed. We're just proposing that it have some oversight and discussion with the community who wants to save heritage trees. And then there is a replacement, in our proposal, there is for a heritage tree which is approved for removal, there is a replacement of a 6-inch tree in diameter for every 12 inches in diameter of the removed tree. For example, a 24-inch heritage tree are cut off, 2 6-inch diameter trees would need to be replaced.
Yeah, and I would propose that you never have to ask permission when it's not in the front setback. That you can just go straight to replacement, and you make the replacement even more stringent, perhaps with minimum size, and or total inches.
And maybe to your point about the unique circumstances, there's some amount of city arborist discretion that gets involved in those kind of things. Like, we could set like a threshold on the minimum size, but like, I think if we gave some flex to the city arborist, cause I don't know really, so one of the this was a landscaper person, so not actually an arborist, but they were like, yeah, the truth is, like, for a certain range of sizes, if you take a big tree and put it in, it's actually not going to grow. Like, the smaller tree will end up catching and being about the same as if you put in the big tree, because the big tree has more shock to the system once it gets transplanted, and so it doesn't actually continue to increase in size for a few years while it resets. Whereas like the smaller 3-inch tree or something like that actually has the ability to just adapt better and just take off sooner. And so they end up kind of evening out to some extent. I don't know. So this is something that I was like, really? But I was like, look, I'm not an expert on these things, so maybe if the city arborist is a professional who's, certified in this field, they would know the best way to replace that type of square footage or that type of canopy.
Bryce, is there such a thing as like a consulting arborist that would consult with the city on some of these items and kind of help? Because nobody's an expert, there's
Yeah,
not a
how are
single
we-
arborist involved in the drafting of this tree
City
ordinance.
arborist is a defined term. Like, how are we handling that before?
Okay, so let me address kind of the first piece. I'm sure there is, and I'm sure the city probably has an arborist that's happy to answer like really specific tree questions, right? Like, hey, does a 2-inch tree outgrow a 3-inch tree planted at the same time that are both transplanted? And there is logic behind that, and I have experience where we have seen certain size trees that we were like, we want them a little bigger, and we had like 2-inch trees outgrowing 3.5-inch trees over a period of time. Is there somebody who can answer your more difficult questions of like, what's our tree canopy? What should it be? How many should we be planting per acre? All of that? Probably not. They'll give you recommendations about, hey, this stuff is just too dense and you're gonna have tree problems. But at the end of the day, the really hard part on a lot of this is it's up to you, the community. I mean, up to y'all to, the CR Cube to offer up recommendations, P&Z to also evaluate that and look at it, and then also council ultimately to make that decision. And this is just one of those difficult items that there's a lot of options. So there is some state law on this. Everything that you've been saying, none of it is triggering my, wait a second. We're still relatively in the bounds of what we can do. And if you're ever interested, that is in Local Government Code 212, the very end of the chapter. There's just one section, 948 or something like that, that deals with trees. A lot of it is fee-based, though, because a lot of communities also have a fee in lieu option to help with some of that. Not advocating anything, just giving commentary. For different reasons, for different purposes. So, yes, I can also visit with staff and we can see what I've not met their arborist, but what they can do, or maybe it's a combination of commentary with the CR Cube group to talk through. Hey, here's options, and let's maybe show up at a meeting and I can tag team it with them on the planning side of here's other ways to kind of think about this to just provide thoughts of ways to split that pie. As it was mentioned earlier, hey, could we potentially do it where it requires permission in certain spots but not in others? Sure. Or maybe it has to do with if you have over a certain amount of inches per acre or some calculation like that, there's an easier allowance to remove without replacement. Yes. The answer is just yes. There's a lot of options that we could write in there. Where is that start-stop point for some of those things? Don't know. We can give you like a starting range, but ultimately it'll be up to the group to decide what you think is appropriate.
I think the city of Westlake will allow you to plant some of your replacement trees, like in a public park or something like that. So you don't necessarily have to plant them on your own lot. And I also think that they do have a financial component to their ordinance, so that if you elect not to plant exactly what's required, you can pay the city for some of that difference. I think, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and one thing just to kind of think about is as you work through the replacements and those pieces, trees is a really hard thing. Even when we were working on buffering and talking through buffers, when people clear cut things and I have to replace it, yeah, it looks piddly and small at first, but trees is one of those things that I have to consider over time, right? Because if I have too much replacement, I have to recall those in the future. Does that mean I'm going to still have to, in theory, yet again replant, and I basically have this propagation of excessive plantings and weirdness that happens at some point on certain lots? Or maybe the rules change in the future and it kind of levels itself out. Don't know. Can't read the future. Wish I could. But you know, those are just considerations, and it is tough. It's tough about, yeah, that was a gorgeous tree. We want you to feel it. You basically just slapped us in the face and found that loophole. We don't like that. We want you to put it all back. So it's a tough conversation.
Let me show my ignorance. Does the city of Rollingwood have a site plan approval process before the building plan?
You do. So you have that on commercial, and then site plans are required to come in for residential as well, and they're
Yes.
reviewed with the building permits.
For everything.
Yeah.
So there's trees.
Including your tree replacement plan.
Yeah, the
With
full
the
piece
site plan.
comes in, all of the site work on the res side comes in with the residential building permit. On the commercial side, there's actually a separate process that we kind of go through, zoning compliance and all of those pieces as a prerequisite to submitting building permits.
Which is one of the challenges, I think, with the way the commercial code is written. Just, you know, there's not a process to come in and spitball your tree plan with the city. So, you know, you're either designing your entire house, coming in and saying, is it reasonable or not for me to do this? No, we find it unreasonable. Now I'm $50,000 more into my design. You know, I think in large part, most people probably try to be reasonable about preserving trees outside of spec builders, unfortunately. But that's tough, is you don't have a way to come in and see, am I heading in the right direction? Is this going to be reasonable or unreasonable?
Yeah, I think part of my stance on the heritage tree and not having to protect them in the buildable areas, I think 90% of people that have a nice tree in their buildable area design around it. You know, I think the vast majority do. I mean, I'm not saying all of them do, but I think, you know, most.
It's part of what makes it lot valuable.
Yeah.
It makes it maybe the number one thing almost. So I mean, I think it's I don't think it's a pervasive problem that people are just trying to kill heritage trees. I think there's a few bad actors out there, and we restrict it in the areas where it's meaningful.
I think the front yard heavy restrictions is a no-brainer.
But like the house being built next door to me, it was a couple of big trees, and they were in the backyard. And,
Well, I think
and
we
it's
have to protect that
affecting
too.
the drainage, because those trees mitigated some of the drainage problem, so.
Yeah, I think
an
in
issue.
the setbacks should be a different
Yeah.
I think
treatment.
people do a lot more grading in their rear yard for pools and things, you know, which is probably, I've seen that a lot. They
Yeah.
did a whole lot in that backyard. I mean, for better or worse, but I mean, I think there's probably gonna be a pool there and some
Oh,
things
yeah.
like that, and that's why the trees are gone. You know, I mean. So
Well,
you
to
see-
Brian's point about having this separate from a comprehensive plan, I do think that the preservation of trees in general is something that most Rollingwood residents are concerned about. And I do think that, I appreciate that the CR cubed has put together a proposal. I appreciate that. And I do think we need to talk about it some more. And I would like to go ahead and proceed with it as a separate proposal to the city council instead of waiting to put it in with something else, is my point. Because it's a pretty important piece of the permitting process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can't do anything with it tonight. We're just giving them feedback on what it should look like when it comes to us.
So
but-
could I just kind of summarize what I think I'm hearing that you'd like me to take back to the CRCRC? And that's that you want to maybe limit heritage tree removal from the buildable area should be allowed under a permit with mitigation or no mitigation? Or?
With, I think.
With.
I mean, provided that it's feasible on the property. I don't know how we're gonna figure out what that number
Okay.
is, but
With mitigation, but, and then the other thing I'm hearing is that you want some kind of a formula perhaps to, or you want to limit, what about non-heritage trees taken from the buildable area?
I mean,
Right now they're
we currently
replaceable.
have a restriction on that.
well,
Yeah.
we have replacement requirements. I
Yeah.
think they're
They're
fine.
working.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think you.
You're just saying that the heritage tree removal, you're proposing a heritage tree removal from the buildable area would not need separate approval by the city council or whatever.
Or
other
POA
board.
or, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would just leave that under the normal procedure that we've been using for the others. That would be my proposal. It would require heightened scrutiny. I would keep heightened scrutiny if you're gonna do something to the front setback. That would be
Okay.
maybe. My proposal, I don't think the rest of, I don't know that anyone else on the commission supports it, but I would revisit the heritage tree definition, cause this is where I'm just kinda like, I don't know that, maybe I need to go look at a 24-inch tree before but when I was looking at what other cities and townships have called heritage tree status, it's a much more rare thing than just a 24-inch.
No, I'll have to disagree with that. It's very common in the 4 communities we looked at, or 3 other communities, it was either
Just because City of Austin does something doesn't
No,
make
no,
it right.
Leander was, I think 20 something inches, maybe 27, 29 inches. Westlake, I don't know what Westlake is exactly, but it's,
I've been to Leander. I haven't
This
seen many trees that size. There's 2.
This is Brooke again. When I looked at this in connection with the commercial code, we looked at Sunset City, no, it's
Sunset Valley.
Sunset Valley,
Sunset Valley.
Lakeway, Bee Caves, Westlake, Wimberley, Dripping Springs, and Bee Cave. And 24 was pretty standard for defining a heritage tree.
I'll say Westlake Hills, I pulled up, they don't have a definition of a heritage tree, but they have greater requirements, about 14 inches. 100 requires a variance and 150% replacement required. But one of the things with Westlake Hills that's always been a challenge is they have larger lots and more flexibility in how you can lay out your
I guess,
home.
yeah, maybe the way I'll say this instead, if we're gonna do the super restrictive, can't do anything with it absent city council approval and then I think you need to make that a very rare situation. If you wanna call it heritage tree and it's 24 inches, but there's flexibility with it and people can take them out and it's not an act of Congress to get something done, then I guess I don't care what you call it. Call it protected plus or heritage or
Really big tree.
super special trees. I'm fine with it. I just, if there's a 24-inch thing in the front setback and you want to say for those type of trees we're gonna have, I'm probably fine with it. If there's a 24-inch in the building, it's none of these are the treaty oak, and so I'm we don't need to all as a city say that nobody can touch those. That's my biggest concern.
Did you have anything else there, Jay?
Just were there any other items on the list that needed more discussion?
I continue to wonder why cedar elms are protected, but that's just because I feel like they grow fast, they get really tall, but they're super brittle and they're not really long lifespan trees. So putting them in like a heightened protected category to me seems, I mean, I have some on my lot. I like them just fine, but they're also the first to come down in like a windstorm or something like
I
that.
think if you took out all the cedar elms in rolling wood, it wouldn't be rolling wood anymore.
No, I know, but
It's a.
I'd rather see that like people plant oaks or, you know, things that are a little bit more, that have a longer lifespan and are sturdier trees.
Yeah, if they take out a cedar elm, they can replace it with an oak tree, you know.
What are the protected trees? Sorry.
It was in
There
the
they are.
appendix, and
The ash.
the
Cypress,
protected trees are
like I
Texas
said.
ash, bald cypress, American elm, cedar elm, Texas madrone, big tooth maple, all oaks, pecan, walnut, Arizona walnut, and eastern black walnut.
So can we maybe as a, I think it says replace protected with protected species, right?
Right.
Can we provide for like, I mean, a diversity of canopy, like some understory items like mountain laurels, redbuds, etc., and allow for those as replacements in some circumstances?
Well, if you're replacing a protected tree taken 20 feet from an above-ground power cable or telephone line, then you can replace it with alternative trees, which includes crepe myrtles, et cetera, which don't grow very high, you know, 15 feet.
But not, if you take out like one that's not below a power line, you can't replace it with those. Crepe
Right.
myrtle.
Well, I'm thinking as though like, if you have a lot with a bunch of taller trees, I mean, you can plant mountain laurels below them, they grow just fine.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So, I mean, there's a way to
Not at my house.
discourage just taking out too many trees if it's free, if, you know, you could replace them with something. But, I mean, having all oak trees is not a very appealing environment for,
No, I agree.
you
There-
know, animals, birds, whatever. So I think some diversity of species is good.
I agree.
There's one part in the commercial ordinance that you just passed that might be useful in our recommendations, and that is an exception to the mitigation requirements, in other words, the replacement requirements, may be granted by a building official with the approval of the city arborist if the applicant demonstrates the existing tree canopy would prohibit the growth of replacement trees. In other words, you just totally, you know, your lot's covered with trees already, where are you gonna put it? The required replacement trees to be installed would be planted under the canopy of an existing tree. And a permit authorizing the removal of a protected or heritage tree shall require, no, sorry, that was it, 1 and 2. Putting some language in there about mitigation if you've got too many trees. I think that is probably more workable than coming up with very elaborate formulas of how many trees are on the lot versus the size of the lot. I haven't seen that in any tree ordinance that I've looked at. I don't know if you all, the reviews you did,
The closest would be Westlake. They have kind of a formula.
the formula.
I don't think you can cut down a 2-inch cedar tree in
That's the only
Westlake.
one I've seen.
It's great.
I'm not recommending it, I'm just, he asked if I'd seen it.
So if we maybe work some of that into the next version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, as you know, the CRCRC meets twice a month. Those meetings are open. Your input is certainly welcome. You can show up anytime you like, as long as there's not 4 of you, well, 3 plus me, but if you have any other recommendations with regard to this or anything else that we're working on, you know, send us an email. It's fine. I think this was very useful, and I would hate to have had Jay bring what we all thought was going to be the final to you and then have this discussion then. you know, I don't know about these heritage trees. You know, I don't want that. I'd rather that we're pretty much on the same page before we get to that point.
Oh, I think,
So that-
yeah, you guys have, this is a really great process.
Yeah.
Just to be really clear, you guys have done awesome work, and Jay, your presentation last week was super helpful because it really defined a lot of the issues for me to look into in the interim week. So,
Okay.
the only other thing I had, because I was going through my notes, was there's a proposal to redefine city arborist to either be a city arborist or just somebody designated by the city council to perform the duties. And I'd rather keep it, if we're gonna put a lot of the decision making and some amount of authority in deciding some of these discretionary things that might relate to trees, I would prefer to keep it as a certified arborist. So that we have, because frankly, I think when we're talking about some of these questions, like, well, what about this versus that? And it really makes, you know, like, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what the right balance is, like on tree density,
Right.
for example. I don't know. So if we're gonna, like, say, take those kind of decision makings and put it in the role of a city arborist, then I would keep it as a certified arborist. So
Here's-
that was
here's
one of my only other feedback items.
Here's a thought for the future, is that if we did something like that, then we might, as the P and Z, make a recommendation to city council to include city arborists in the city budget at the end of the year, because I think we don't have a city arborist right now.
That's one way to eliminate the position if we don't have money for it, I
Yeah,
guess.
well, that's right, I mean, you know.
I mean, you can have a consulting arborist.
And I think that
Make the fees
the
cover
notion,
the
Yeah.
arborist.
the notion
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
was to provide, the notion here was to provide some practical relief to that requirement.
Yeah.
You know, that, you know, right now, no one's looking at anything.
I think
You know?
one problem is that the city arborist is called out in the ordinance numerous times that they are supposed to review the original tree plan, the removal plan, the replacement plan, and then they're supposed to come back after the work's done and make sure that what was done was actually done. And then they're supposed to come back later and after 3 years and make sure that the trees that were replaced are still viable. So there's a lot of steps in here that the current code says a city arborist needs to do, which is not being done because the city doesn't have a city arborist on staff. They, as far as I know, they hire, you know, consultants.
Right, we have a consulting arborist, but the things that are, you know, objective criteria, the building official generally makes the calls on. So we are reviewing those applications as they come in, we are checking the plans, we are, going back to make sure what was planted is there, but as far as actual, we would call in a consulting arborist if we needed their,
Oh.
So can
Who's
we,
checking the landscape plan? Yay, Nikki,
services. Mhm.
The tree plan, right? Just the tree plan, yeah.
Right.
yeah,
the
Mhm.
trees.
To ensure that it's.
So does
So,
the-
but as for landscaping itself, there's no check.
there's no,
There's no,
there's no
Ordinance.
requirement.
We don't have a
There's no landscape
Yeah, we have a
requirements.
site plan, but that's not the same.
And thank goodness for us not being an HOA.
Right.
Yeah.
Just
Next,
make it-
next month's agenda.
Please, there's a reason people move here to be away
So
from HOA.
Jay, it's like currently you're saying that, and maybe we can clean that up, that the code says city arborist, but in fact it's staff that's doing these functions, so can we designate what staff does and then obviously leave the ability to plant more trees on a heavily wooded lot or, you know, special removal and the setback or whatever is, you
Yeah,
know, appropriate for a real arborist to do and segregate those things?
I think that's the solve, is to try and, if there's something that doesn't need an arborist to make the call, then let's just redefine that to be
Staff.
building official
Yeah.
or,
Right.
is that your, somebody's got the official title, is it called building official? Yeah, so maybe some of these things become building official instead of city arborist.
I think we just have to make a decision on how often do we wanna rely on the, you know, if for us it'd be a contract, we wouldn't have the funds right now for a full-time arborist, I suppose that's something the council could budget for. So we would need to kinda make that determination when we feel like that needs to come into play, but we feel like if there's objective criteria, that our building official is more than capable, and we have resources we can always reach out to if there are questions, so that's kind of how we've interpreted that.
Well, and Mike did make the suggestion that perhaps it should be added to the building permit fee, the cost of a consultant arborist.
That's a possibility, absolutely.
Which is something I'd like to put on the agenda for some point. We've had some talk, you know, about city resources and how we pay for some things. So I think we ought to consider some, I hate to say increased building fees, but they're not terribly high. And to the extent that staff can't keep up, it's a resources thing. And I think that, you know, that might be a good way to solve it. So I don't want to discuss it now.
I think we can make recommendations in that regard. We can do that.
So in the wording, what I'm hearing, I think, is what we had tried to put in as a fudge factor, basically. The city could use a city official to do most of these determinations, but when a city arborist is needed, it would be a certified arborist. Otherwise, we'd have to go back in, and we could do this, is every time it says city arborist, put in city official for that particular task. But
I wouldn't do it for everyone. I would just do it for the ones where it seems like it doesn't need to be an arborist. You know, I think that's the cleaner way of doing it.
Or
rather
could it be
than-
the city administrator, building official, you know, with use of a consulting arborist when deemed required or something like that, if they feel like they need an expert to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got the uses. There's a defined term, city arborist, and then there's building official. I think if there's anything that's an objective criteria, like you were describing, no need for a city arborist to weigh in. Building official should be able to handle that. When it's questions of like viability of tree or what's the density or something like that, then that should be a city arborist call. And that's how I'd go through each of these mentions of city arborist. Is it's like, let's revisit when we're using that term, and is it really need an arborist? Because it sounds like 80% of those references don't really need the arborist. So I would suggest, instead of redefining city arborist, let's just replace those with building official, or whoever staff thinks makes the call on that anyway.
and then leave in city arborist as a separate definition when it's called for.
these special circumstances
Right.
that like you need to be an expert on.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if we're gonna have a
trees.
special exception removal in the
Right.
right of way, then the city arborist ought to chime in on that when they go to council.
Yeah.
Or in the setback.
We could rewrite it that way. Sure.
Yep. I think Tom wants to say something.
One thing about the cost that we have of this, we do have an ordinance that says that if the cost to the city exceeds our building permit, we collect the additional fee from the issuing a CO. So we could, I mean, we have to keep accounting of it, but the city should not be out anything during this process. And that would be including if we had to bring in an arborist.
Yeah, but I think my learnings over the last few months is that that's related to third-party expenses only, and we
We're not
really
accounting for
we
like staff time.
we really have not a staff availability problem when it comes to just inspections and I mean you've got all, tree protection and all sorts of things in here that take more time.
But
Yeah.
when there is a third party involved, like a city arborist, we can charge for it.
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah, yeah.
budget item for the council.
Okay.
It's just a
Okay.
process.
And I'm looking through the requirements to be a certified arborist, and so I would like the term certified arborist, which Brian at first mentioned, when that term be used for those times when it's appropriate.
Right, it would say, city arborist definition, city arborist is a certified arborist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
You don't want
Yeah.
you don't want the person cutting the tree down to go get any old certified arborist they can
Yeah.
find.
No, but I mean, I'm looking, the criteria are pretty, it's kinda interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Jay.
Very
Really
good.
Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
It was super
Thanks
helpful.
very much. Appreciate More to do.
Brian's also a
More to
certified
do.
attorney.
Okay.
Doesn't necessarily mean he knows what he's doing.
He's a heritage certified attorney.
With that,
Super
I'm going
heritage.
He's a
to-
super special attorney.
Super special heritage
Wow,
attorney.
wow, yeah, a lot of gray hair is what you're saying, I hear you.
With that, I'm going to close the discussion on item 4 and move along to item 5 in our final, which is, last week we talked a little bit about special exceptions, and that I had attended some training that was put on by our, the outfit that our council reports through. And I found that training particularly beneficial, not just for learning about special exceptions, but just kind of getting better grounded in the responsibilities of planning and zoning. When I got appointed to this position, this commission, it was like, okay, you show up, you sit in the chair, you start listening to people, and they make a decision. It was really not a whole lot of discussion as to what the real job was, or why I was there, or why there were 7 people instead of 5, or any of that. I don't know about you, but I thought that I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. And so what I'm suggesting is that, one, we bring in our council group here to provide probably what would amount to about a half day of training in planning and zoning. And it may also benefit BOA because they're a pretty big component of our government too, that operates similar to the way we do. And so is that amenable to everyone if they're?
Would this be a mandatory training?
Yes. Yes, we're talking about mandatory training here. Yeah.
I'm more in favor of self-study on this issue.
Well, the reason,
I wonder if there are online
well,
training. I think it would be a challenge to get
let me
everybody
take it to
corralled
this-
for a half day.
Let me take it to the second step. I want to see everybody trained up in what planning and zoning by state law is required to do, okay? But I also want us to have, and we talked about this last week, how we do not have the latitude to discuss issues. I also want to have that same session be used to get our perspectives on what we think we ought to be doing, who it is we work for, and what we as a group represent, what we think we should be doing, not just what the state law says we are to be doing, so that we have a better understanding of the opinions as they're being discussed here. That's, frankly, sometimes I'm surprised by some of the things I hear. And I don't mind surprises that much, but whenever they come at the wrong time, well, then it becomes an issue for me. But, so what I would like to do legally is to have some sort of a discussion where we do talk about our roles and where we see ourselves in filling those. So that's
Wouldn't
the
that
other
need
piece
to be
it.
in one of our
And
meetings?
to that point, it's not self-study. It's not.
Well, I guess I'll say this,
Yeah.
I took the course that we were required to take on
Sure.
Open Meetings Acts. I've been on P&Z for quite some time. I've been involved with several variance requests that gone up to Board of Adjustment and back down, and then even on to City Council, and even a lawsuit at the district level. So I feel like I have a good understanding of these things. On the point of like having an open dialogue in our meetings, I'm all for if we want to set an agenda item to say like, let's talk about what our understanding is and how we want to approach, these type of code provisions we're bringing and stuff. Like, that sounds great. Let's just make it part of the regular meeting as opposed to like some separate additional Saturday morning training. That sounds like I'm not
I was trying to get to that last week, Brian, and I thought that I was hearing from our legal counsel that we can't do that. We can't do that.
I thought we had to do it that way.
I thought it was because it wasn't posted as an agenda item.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was because it wasn't posted as an agenda item with very specific topics.
Correct. So you can only talk about what's on your agenda. So to Brian's point, you can absolutely put things on there that you want
Well-
to talk about,
There's an exception.
but it
Yeah,
can't be overly broad. You can't just be like, I want to talk about all things development in Rollingwood, right? We've got to be more specific about that. But if you want to, for example, talk about the roles and responsibilities of the Planning and Zoning Commission, absolutely, it's an agenda item that can be on there.
See, there's a difference between a meeting that we have here and a workshop. And a workshop gives us a little more latitude to discuss because decisions aren't being made, it's only discussion. Kind of like what we just did, I guess, with Jay's stuff here. We weren't really making decisions. We were talking about something that is going to come before us, and we're going to, just kind of get an opinion on, are we heading the right direction? Maybe we can make some changes here, fix the fringes up a bit. But maybe, from my perspective, on a broader range of subjects. Just,
Are we allowed to do that in a workshop with all of us there?
well, I think with a workshop, I think we
But
are.
a workshop
allowed
had to be less than a quorum now.
Yeah,
it's,
it doesn't
it's a
have
little
to be.
touchy. If you want to just talk about, certain procedural issues, I think certain things are better kept just in a regular agenda, because it can get very touchy. If you get, on the discussion of anything substantive, and you have a quorum present, that's against the local government code. So you got to be very careful with that.
Yeah, I think it's,
Even in a workshop.
yeah, how do you pass an ordinance? I think there's a few different ways of doing that, and I'm trying to figure them out. And, I'm pretty new, and I think you all agree that I would benefit from the training.
So one thing that I might offer up, because I'm totally with Brian, I'm happy to do client training on the weekends. I don't like to do that, but I'm happy to do it. My preference maybe for you all, if you want to do certain targeted training on certain topics, etc., is we can do that and can incorporate it into the meeting. Just have like an hour set aside to do training and discussion on that item, continue with your regular business, so on and so forth. And even through that, you can also generate a list of topics, because I know there's a lot of things that y'all like to talk about, but you also don't like to sit here necessarily all evening. And so maybe it's something where you have just a meeting to brainstorm topics of things you want to talk about and an order to those things. And we decide as a commission to just take down one or two per meeting or have them on the agenda for discussion, whether we get to it or not, depending on how long the meeting goes, is at the discretion of the commission.
I guess from a practical standpoint, we find ourselves, particularly with CRC output ramping up, that our meetings are going to be largely taken up.
Can I?
And that's kind of why I wanted to set this aside as a separate item, because we're getting into some of the heavy-dutiest kind of stuff that we're going to be doing here.
Apologies. Do we still have quorum if I have to step out for a minute?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, I was happy to have a separate session.
And again, however the commission would like to handle it, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and we can break things up. Most of it, as you know from attending the ACOG, most of it can come packaged into nice little 45-minute to hour and a half discussions and training sessions.
I think those are all great ideas, but I also would like some reading material that I could do ahead of time so that we don't, just for preparation, that would hopefully make the discussion shorter because we would have been somewhat educated ahead of time.
All the training that I do and training that I've done with Charlie as well, we do PowerPoints. We're happy to get those out to you well in advance that generally are pretty text heavy and very local government code referencey and other state law referencey. So,
Well, how do y'all feel about incorporating something with the Board of Adjustment as well?
I guess I'm confused what it feels like you have a process issue with how it's gone. I mean, I feel like the tree presentation that's great. I
Yeah.
think this is the right way to work through these issues and get, feedback as you step through these complicated issues. But It sounds like maybe you don't like that process.
And
Oh,
that's
no,
something
no,
we can
no,
talk
I
about
actually
at,
do.
another meeting as well, if we set it on the agenda.
Yeah, no, I actually, I wanted this to go that way. What Jay had done and the discussion that we had, I think in the long term is gonna, result in a better product that comes from the CRCRC and one that is more easily approved by this group. So, no, I think that's a great process. No, I just wanna be sure that we all know what we're saying whenever we're saying it. I'm curious, what would be the top 3 things that each one of us would think would be the decision process for whether or not we say yay or nay on a particular item? How would you know? How do you know what you want to do whenever something is brought to us? What's your decision process? That kind of thing. How can we be the best that we can be?
I mean, isn't that going to vary on every issue?
But I don't know. Does it?
For me, for sure,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's probably some broad things, like maybe, does it benefit the public, Or is it my neighborhood that I'm more concerned about?
So to kind of keep
That
us
kind of
in the scope of the training as a whole, I'll just offer this factual piece up, which is pretty much every application that you have has got some amount of criteria written into the code, at least to start you off on your general consideration. So that is important, whether that be a subdivision plat, a zoning case, a board of adjustment variance, special exception, etc. And it does. Each case is generally unique, especially in Rollingwood, as well as each type of application is different and has potentially different criteria. So, but again, happy to include that stuff if we want to have a session item on some of that, or even just include it as part of that juxtaposition of P&Z roles against other application types and boards and commissions to kind of just understand where all that falls together.
At any rate, if you're okay with it, I'd like to work with city council, city staff, to try to get something together. And we can make a determination as to whether it can be done through the normal course of a meeting business, or do we need to have a separate session to do it. But my concern is that we're gonna be pretty busy here in the next meetings, next 6 months. There's gonna be a lot.
Okay.
I'm open to,
All
open to ideas. Yeah.
Good.
As long as we're not meeting next week, also, right?
Okay, very good. All right, got a motion to,
Thank you, everybody, for all
Yes,
the
thank you.
work that
Thanks
y'all
for-
are doing
yeah.
behind the scenes. Appreciate it.
very good.
I move to adjourn.
Okay,
I second.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it is 8:20.